y'all, it's Kimberly here. Thank you for coming to my channel. Well, it's really hot here in Texas, in case you haven't heard. In case people who haven't come to my channel before, I live in Texas. It's extremely hot here. I gripe about the weather all the time, so that's something I talk about. I usually give a little snippet about the weather every once in a while, especially when it's super hot. And we've had like a mild, or in the area I live in the lower panhandle, it's been quite mild actually. We've only had about a week of, like, say, heat wave type of weather over 100 degrees. I believe one day it was about 108 degrees, and another day maybe got up to like 106. But throughout that week it was, you know, well over 100, 102, 103 particular days. And that went on for about at least 6 or 7 days. And then we had a few days that it dropped like 20 degrees, which to us is very mild and we love it. But that's one of the caveats of living in Texas. It is very hot here, and it's getting hotter because I don't remember it being like this growing up as a child. And right now it's really nice. It's overcast, it's raining, it's a little bit of rain coming down. I love days like that. That's my favorite type of weather, is fall or overcast. I've had so much bright sunny days. I can trade off a lot more of those for gloomy, downcast days. A lot of people might not like those kind of days. It maybe depresses them, but to me, I love it. And you know, in the heat, working in the heat, being in the heat, it makes you tired. It wears you down. It exhausts you. And unfortunately, there was a postal worker in Dallas, 36-year postal worker, that collapsed and died as he was doing his route. A homeowner ran outside, saw what happened, and tried to revive him. He did not survive. His name was Eugene Gates Jr., and my condolences go out to his family. It's not quite clear if it was heat-related, but most likely. The Postal Service had their start time at 7:30. They changed it to 8:30. And since this has happened, they have changed their start time back to 7:30. That way people can try to get out of the heat faster, get through with the route faster. There's also a huge issue with the inmates in Texas prisons that are dying from heat-related incidents. And officially, they don't really acknowledge it as a heat-related death. It's very, very rare if they do. But when a 35-year-old man is outside working in high heat, cutting the grass, starts to have heat-related issues, and then he dies of a heart attack, a normally healthy person like that, that's a heat-related death. It may have caused a heart attack. The heat may have, because when you get overheated, your blood pressure drops, and then your heart has to work twice as hard, and that can induce heart attacks. So when you live in a hot place like Arizona, Southern California, Texas, Florida, even Louisiana, parts of the lower coastal states can be very hot. And they can be very humid and muggy, which in the area I live in, it's more of a dry heat, which I would pick a dry heat any day over humid, wet, muggy heat. It's hard to breathe to me. I have asthma, and I've been to the coast. I've been to Austin, Houston area, all down along the coastline, and I've been San Antonio. San Antonio is like an oven, and it gets very humid, like a convection oven. It's in bigger cities, it's like the heat and the mugginess just hang in the air. And in the part of Texas is basically a desert, if people don't know that. Texas has a huge part of the landmass that is pretty much basically considered desert land. And that's going from the western part of the state on down some bit into the valley there, all the way to Mexico. There's very dry. There's not a lot of large cities there. El Paso is probably the biggest city in that part of the state. And then there's a lot of small communities or small little towns in that area. So it's less populated in the western part of Texas. The middle to eastern part is much greener. You can grow crops. We grow tons of cotton, and there's cotton everywhere here. Corn. They rotate their crops, and they grow just all kinds of things, all kinds of vegetables. I've worked in the fields before. And I worked in the fields as a teenager, and it's extremely hard, horrible, hot work. And it makes me laugh to no end that when people say that, well, the immigrants are taking our jobs. You know, there's a lot of jobs that we won't do, that white people, other people, citizens of the U.S., that it just is comical, you know, the jobs that they think that are being taken by a lot of these immigrants, people who don't speak English, people who barely have any schooling, barely can communicate. You know, they're not going up taking high-paying jobs. These are people that are struggling, and they're coming across the border. And for Texas, there's, I don't know how many. I've worked with illegals in the fields. I've worked with illegals in other jobs. And there's typically times that I was one or maybe just a handful of white people that were working those jobs because they were so physically demanding and not attracting a lot of people who have an education or gone to school. I've worked in a sweatshop. I've worked in a sweatshop where it was investigated. I quit that job, and then within a few months, that company was being investigated by Congress for sweatshop conditions, and that's part of the reason why I quit. And I was getting paid just barely above minimum wage, and I had been there almost 4 years. And a lot of the people that worked there were illegals. And a lot of companies rely on these people, because these conditions are horrible. And most people will not work in these conditions. I tried to work I was in an agriculture job just a couple of years ago. I was mainly working indoors, but in the summer, there was a stint that we had to do out in the fields. And it got up to about 95 degrees, and I started having a reaction because I had just had the COVID shot, and I had a lot of complications and side effects from that. And I just couldn't do it. It was, you know, I was afraid I was going to have a heart attack or something was happening. I could feel my blood pressure dropping, and I do have low blood pressure issues. So when you're in sweltering heat like that, it's a killer. You know, people expire from it all the time. But we are more inclined here to be acclimated to it or adjust to it because of you have to do certain things. You have to have a lot of water. You have to have shade, and you have to prepare for the day that it's going to be 100 degrees, you know, and get to work early and try to get out early, take breaks, make sure that if you start to feel faint or, you know, sick, that you sit down and drink some water. And this brings up an issue that I don't know what's wrong with our governor. He's lost his mind. He took away there was a break law in Texas for construction workers and workers in certain fields that every 4 hours you got a 10-minute water break where you were allowed to drink something and seek shade. He took those away, and companies can just not give you that break or leave it up to and their reasoning to me was somewhat asinine that, well, we'll leave it up to the companies because they know. Actually, I didn't quite understand it was such an idiotic explanation, you know, because that leaves it open for the company to not give you that break. If you're a construction worker, roofer, working, if it's 100 degrees and you're up there, roofers, you know, they work at a very high speed. In order to keep that job, you've got to be very fast usually. And you're up on top of a roof, there's no shade, and at least once in 4 hours, you need a break. You need to be able to seek shade, get a little bit to drink, or even go to the restroom or something like that. So I think it's just beyond comprehension it serves no purpose to take that break away. And I think, in a way, it was more like giving the right back to the owner of the company to delegate authority or something like that. It was a stupid, not a good decision. But and I remember when I was young that the city I lived in there was a community of people that wanted to put a zoo in this city. And my mom, I wanted the zoo to be there because I love animals and I wanted to go there or work there someday. I was young and little. I was a child, and I thought, oh, that'll be so fun, to go there. But my mom explained to me that it would be like cruel to bring a lot of the animals here that maybe aren't used to the heat. And the city I lived in wasn't, financially, she explained to me, they probably weren't financially able to really take care of the animals the way they should be. And so it changed my mind, and I became more conscious of, treating animals that way. Not, you don't want them to be, a lot of zoos in Texas, the animals maybe aren't in the best conditions, and it's very hot, and it takes a lot of money to maintain conditions that are right for certain animals. Certain animals you don't even want to bring them here. I can't see bringing a polar bear or seals here unless you have a refrigerated area where they can be comfortable, be out of the sweltering heat. And as far as the sweltering heat in Texas, prison is someplace you don't want to be. Probably about 70% of the Texas prisons in the living quarters, the area where most of the prisoners sleep or in their cells, the area where they're confined to mostly, is not air conditioned. Maybe some of the main rooms, some of the TV rooms or stuff like that, areas like that, common rooms, the cafeteria may be air conditioned and maybe not. There's a lot of prisons and jails that do not have any air conditioning at all. And I know people say, well, boo-hoo on the prisoners, but when you're there for a 2-year thing that you made some stupid mistake, maybe you were stealing license plates or stealing cars, you didn't harm anybody, and then to put you in inhumane conditions like that, that's, I believe strongly in people paying for their crimes and going to jail and serving out their sentence. And don't get me wrong, I'm not wishy-washy on that at all. In fact, it infuriates me a lot that a lot of places you get very little time for a lot of the crimes that you commit. And yeah, there's a provision for punishment, but not for cruel and inhumane conditions like that. I mean, when you're I've been in a workspace where it's reached 120 something degrees, and the state came in and immediately made them the state inspector stood there and said, you need to do something about this right now. We're not leaving until you alleviate this problem. They had to go and buy air conditioning units, put them in. It was in a kitchen, and the air conditioning unit, the central air, whatever you call it, had broke, and they had never fixed it for like a couple of years. And there was there's actually 2 air conditioning units, window units. One of them broke one year, and then the next, I don't work there now, but that present year, it broke down. And it was getting to be, she was using a temperature gauge, and the air alone was, I think, going from 112 to about 120 degrees next to the ovens. And they made them saying that we're going to shut this kitchen down if you don't, do it right now. And so they had to go and buy air conditioning units at a higher cost because we live in a small town. They had to run to the hardware store here, which everything's more expensive in a small town. They can gouge you for prices for, there's not much competition. And they had to install them and get them running before the state would leave. And that was only because I worked in a nursing home, and even though the residents weren't in that area, they still had provision for us. The state did, that it was just unbearable conditions for employees to work in. And so that's also true of employees that work in prisons. If you're going to work in a Texas prison, You might want to check out what's the air conditioning, what's going on, how hot it is, especially lower down south. In areas where it's more humid, it can reach 120, 130 degrees in an enclosed space when it's like 110, 115 degrees outside. And it does get that hot here in Texas. I believe it was like 114 or 15 degrees the day that that postal worker passed out and did not survive. So, and Texas has been compared to other places in the Middle East that are just recently saying that Texas is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. So I know people think that I'm probably just complaining, but it is a real thing that I have noticed just growing up here all the years. It's gotten hotter and hotter and more days above 100 degrees in the same area that I grew up in, So if you're going to work in a Texas prison, and they're having trouble finding people who want to work in those conditions because it's hot, horrible, and you have to wear the uniforms. You got all this equipment to wear. Some of the uniforms are heavy. You got the boots and stuff like that, and hats. It can be unbearable. Not just for the prisoners. It's also for the people that work there. So, Texas prison or jail is nowhere you want to be. It's already tough enough. Our jails are very well known for being, hard to survive. But the heat makes it even worse. And the state doesn't recognize if you die from heat exhaustion, heat-related deaths. I think it's been about 10 or 11 years since they have acknowledged, and there have been hundreds of prisoners that have died from this. In the past, I want to say maybe like 20 years. I didn't do a real hard search on the statistics, but I know because we hear it every year. I hear it on the news every year. X amount of prisoners died. And so it's a real deal, and it's not something you want. Don't get arrested in Texas. Don't get convicted here. It's not a place you want to be. Not somewhere you want to go. All right, thank you all, and y'all have a good day.